Welcome back to another chapter of the Mastering Swift tutorial. This is Vedat from Programmership. In this chapter, we are gonna learn function. Function is a block of code that performs a specific task. We can give a name to that block of code and use it in our project. Function provides reusability. That means we can use the same function in our code more than once. We can also define some parameters, in other words, arguments in the function, and we can use these parameters in our function. Function also allows us to return back a value to where it is called. So let's start with the most basic function definition. For that, let's put our keyword, which is func, stands for function, let's say func, and here we're going to define our function name, let's say my message, and open your parentheses and close it. And here, put a dash and then greater symbol. I'm going to define a void type function. Void means that this function will return nothing. Inside this function, I want to print some string, let's say hello world. And outside of the function, let's call it, it's pretty basic, just call the function name, which is my message. And if I hit run, the my message function will be called and hello world will be printed out. Hit run, and there we go, the hello world was printed out. Let's define a parameter and use it in our function. Here in my message, let's get the name as a parameter. Let's say name, put a colon, and specify its data type. Let's say string. And inside the my message function, let's say hello, space, and our name parameter. Put our parameter. And when we call this my message function, we must give a parameter which must be string. Let's say the name is Vedat and hit run. As you can see, the Vedat string was assigned into name parameter and it is used inside the function. It is possible to define multiple parameters in a function. Let's add some other parameters to this function. Let's say surname, but first put a comma. Surname, it is also string. Let's add another one and say age, which is integer. And let's try to print all the parameters inside this print statement. Let's say hello, name, and surname, and let's put a dot. You are age, years old. And at the outside of this my message function, let's define all parameters. Surname is Oslo, and let's say age is 27. And hit run. Sorry, the age must be integer because we just specified it in integer type. Let's define it as integer and hit run. And it says, hello Vedat Oslo, you are 27 years old. So let's try to return a string value from this function. Let's say string instead of void. And here, if I say return instead of print, and let's delete the other parentheses, here it will return this string to where this my message is called, okay? In this case, let's here define a variable, let's say var my first message is equal to my message function. And then let's try to print my first message. Hit run, and here we can see the same result. Well, we can define a default value to the parameters of a function. With that option, we can call a function without giving parameters. Let's make an example. Let's delete all this and create a new function. Let's say func, this time display message. Open your parentheses and close it. And inside, let's get a parameter message. It is in string type, and let's add a default value. To do that, just put a equal and give a default string value. Let's say peace. It is our message. And this function will be void, which means there won't be any return value. Let's say void and put your curly bracket and close it. Inside the display message, let's say print message. And outside of the function, let's try to call the display message function without giving any parameters. And hit run. There we go. We can see the default value, which is peace, was printed out. So let's define a parameter. Let's say message is peace is necessary, and hit run. We can see the string value that we just defined override the default value, which is peace. Alright, what about returning multiple values from a function? One of the most common ways is using collection for returning multiple values from a function. Let's make an example and see how it works. I'm gonna define a function that returns a string array. Let's delete all of this and create a new function. Func, let's say get user names. I don't want any parameters, and the return type will be array, string array. Let's say string. If we put string between square brackets, it represents a string array. Let's put our curly brackets and close it. And inside, let's define a string array which contains some string values. Let's say var user lists is equal to, open your square bracket and close it, and inside let's define some string. User1, put a comma, add another one, let's say user2, and finally let's add user3. And in the next line, let's return the user list. Here outside the function, let's create another variable, which is var my users is equal to our get usernames function. In the next line, let's try to print my users. When we hit run, the get usernames function returns back a string array, which is user list. Let's hit run, and here all the values of user list was printed out. It is alright to use collection if we return multiple values in the same data type. But what about if the data type is different? In this case, it is better to use tuple for return type. Let's make another example. Let's delete this and create a new function. Put our keyword func, let's say get user info. Again, we don't want any parameters for this function, and the return type will be a name tuple. And inside this tuple, let's give a label, which is name. It will be in string data type. Let's give another label, which is surname. It is also a string, and let's add age. This is integer. Finally, open your curly bracket and close it. Inside, let's return a tuple. Remember, to create a tuple, we are going to define our values inside the parentheses. Let's say for the name, Mariam, for the surname, let's say Oslo, and for the age, let's say 45. And outside this function, let's try to get this tuple. This time I will create a constant for that. Let's say let and user info equal to get user info. In the next line, let's try to print the user info dot name. Let's print all the values of tuple. User info dot surname and user info dot age. And let's hit run. We can see all the values of the tuple was printed out. Here in this example, I also want to mention optional a little bit. If you don't know about optional yet, don't worry, I have published a video about it. Just check it out. If our function somehow needs to return a nil value in a specific condition, we can define return type as optional. Suppose we have a function that needs two parameters, which are username and password, and returns back the user information according to these parameters. If there is no matched user info for that username and password, we can return back nil value. Let's see that on an example. So here in the get user info, I want to define two parameters, which are username and password. Let's say user name, which is string, put a comma and define password. This will also be string. Let's delete all of this. And inside the function, let's define some fake username and password. Username 1 is equal to, let's say, Vedat, and let's define another constant which will keep our password 1 2 3 4 5. And in the next line, I want to make a condition. If username parameter is equal to username1, which is our fake username, let's say, and inside parentheses, let's say if the password parameter is also equal to password1, then open your curly bracket and close it. And inside this if condition, I want to return this guy. Let's put it inside the if condition. If one of this parameter will not match, let's say else, just return nil. So to be able to return a nil value, we must make our return type optional. It is pretty basic. Just put a question mark at the end of our tuple. We can see the error was gone. And outside the function, let's define a variable, let's say user login is equal to, and call our getUserInfo function. GetUserInfo, let's say George, and password, let's say 12345. Write it correct. And in the next line, I'm gonna use the optional binding to use the returned optional tuple. Say if let user login is equal to user login and open your curly bracket. So this condition means if the user login is not nil, then assign it into user login, and inside the condition, let's try to print the user login tuple values. Let's say name. We can also define the same name. Let's say user login and delete this question mark. That's all right. Let's print user login dot surname, and finally let's say user login dot age. If user login is nil, let's print please check your credential inside the else statement. When we hit run, the getUserInfo function will return nil because of the wrong username. Let's hit run and see that. Here it says, please check your credential. Why? Because we defined the username as George, but it must be Vedat to return this tuple. If we define something else rather than this guy's, the else statement will be executed and it will return the nil value. Let's say Vedat here instead of George and hit run again. We can see this if condition block was executed. Well, finally, let's talk about inout parameters. Normally, when you send a parameter to a function, the function will create a copy of that parameter and use it inside the function block. So that means your parameters will not be affected by the function codes. However, if we want our parameter to be changed inside a function when we send it, we can use inout parameter. It is better to see that in an example. Let's delete all of this, and here let's define a variable which is my message is equal to, and let's put a default string. Let's say default message. In the next line, let's define a function, say set message. So inside this function, we want to get a parameter, string parameter, which is inout. Let's say source message, which is our parameter name, put a colon, and let's say string, our type. So if I put inout keyword just before the data type, it will be inout parameter. And let's define the return type as void. Here inside the function, let's change the source message inout parameter. Let's say hello world, hello world. And let's first print the my message, and then let's call the set message function, but this time we will put our variable with the ampersand symbol. It will pass the memory address of my message. After calling set message, let's try to print the my message variable again if any change was made. Let's hit run. Here, the before calling set message function, the my message has a default message, which we just defined. But after calling the set message and giving our my message variable, we can see the my message was changed into hello world. That means my message was affected. Alright, that's it for this chapter. See you in the next one. Goodbye.